Brookhaven, Oregon wasn't the kind of place where people expected headlines to be made. The town sat quietly between rolling foothills and winding streams, its downtown marked by a couple of diners, a hardware store, and a post office that still knew most customers by name. The kind of community where gossip traveled fast, but violent crime rarely did. People left their cars unlocked, waved to strangers, and believed that whatever dangers were out there existed far away, in the cities, on the news, not here. That belief shattered on a crisp September morning in 2023, when a woman was found beaten within an inch of her life, just blocks from her home. By the end of the day, she would be dead, and two other women, one barely out of high school, would be in handcuffs, facing charges that could keep them behind bars for decades. What started it all wasn't a robbery or a random act of violence. It began with a phone, a text message, and a love affair that had been kept in the shadows for too long. Her name was Rachel Monroe, 31 years old. A mother, a fiancée, someone whose friends described as dependable, selfless, and maybe a little too trusting for her own good. She had worked her way up to a night shift manager position at the local Brookhaven home supply store. It wasn't glamorous work, but Rachel had a knack for organization and a quiet pride in being the person others could rely on when the store's doors closed and the shelves needed restocking before sunrise. Her life wasn't perfect, far from it. She and her fiancé, Ethan Blake, had been together for almost 8 years, raising their son in a modest 2-bedroom apartment on the edge of town. They'd weathered job changes, late rent notices, and the normal strain of raising a child while both working full-time. By the summer of 2023, they were in what Ethan would later call a quiet rut. The relationship wasn't bad exactly. It just lacked the spark it once had. Then came Carlos Vega. Carlos was one of the stock crew who worked under Rachel on the night shift. He was in his mid-30s, lean, and carried himself with the kind of easy charm that made people want to talk to him. At first, Rachel saw him as just another employee she needed to train and supervise. But working side by side night after night, conversations drifted from work to personal life. They shared stories about their kids, frustrations with bills, and the kind of secrets you tell someone who seems to understand exactly what you mean without you having to explain too much. Carlos wasn't single. He lived with Vanessa Ruiz, his fiancée, and their 2 children in a townhouse across town. And, like Rachel and Ethan, Carlos and Vanessa had their share of problems. According to friends, Vanessa could be volatile, quick to anger if she felt disrespected or betrayed. She didn't hold grudges quietly, she carried them like a torch. Rachel wasn't naive about what getting closer to Carlos could mean. But there was something intoxicating about the attention. The late-night messages, the quick smiles across the break room, the feeling that someone was seeing her again, not just as a mother or a manager, but as a woman. She told herself it was harmless, that she and Carlos were just friends, that Ethan didn't need to know. But lines have a way of blurring in the dark. By late summer, the friendship had crossed into something more. When Rachel's son was at school and Ethan was at work, Carlos would sometimes stop by her apartment. In the quiet hours of the afternoon, behind closed doors, the two built something they thought they could control, a secret tethered by convenience and the thrill of not getting caught. They weren't careful enough. Living with Carlos and Vanessa that summer was Maya Vega, Carlos's 17-year-old younger sister. She'd come to Brookhaven to spend the break before her senior year, splitting her time between part-time babysitting for her nephews and scrolling endlessly on her phone. Maya was close to Vanessa, closer in some ways than she was to her own brother. The two of them would watch TV together, run errands, and vent about life. It wasn't long before Vanessa began to confide her suspicions, that Carlos was distant, that he was hiding something. The tipping point came during a family trip to Arizona in late August for a relative's wedding. Carlos, after a few too many drinks, let something slip to Maya, that he wasn't happy, that he didn't see a future with Vanessa, and that there was someone else. He didn't give a name, but he didn't have to. Maya knew the signs of a secret, and she carried that piece of information back to Vanessa like a spark to kindling. From that moment, Vanessa's suspicions became certainty. It wasn't just about Carlos straying. It was about humiliation. About someone else stepping into a role she believed was hers. In her mind, this other woman wasn't just a threat to her relationship. She was an enemy. In the weeks that followed, Vanessa and Maya began quietly tracking Carlos's movements. They didn't confront him directly. They didn't need to. Instead, they waited for the moment when the truth would be undeniable. That moment came on a sunny lunch break in early September. Vanessa had decided to swing by Carlos's workplace unannounced. She spotted him outside, walking toward a cafe with Rachel at his side. The two weren't holding hands, weren't touching at all. but the way they looked at each other told her everything she needed to know. To Vanessa, that was the confirmation she'd been waiting for. But she didn't explode in public. She didn't scream or cause a scene. She simply turned and walked away, carrying her rage with her like a blade she intended to sharpen. By the time September 10th rolled around, Vanessa had a plan. That morning, Carlos came home from work, exhausted, and fell asleep on the couch. Vanessa waited until his breathing was deep and even. Then she took his phone. Scrolling through his messages with Rachel was like pouring gasoline on an already burning fire. Pet names. Heart emojis. Plans to meet. It was all there in black and white. But instead of confronting Carlos, she decided to use his phone for something else. To set a trap. Posing as Carlos, she sent Rachel a message. That he'd been kicked out, that he didn't know where else to go, that he needed to see her. She picked a spot near the townhouse, somewhere Rachel would feel comfortable meeting him. Rachel didn't hesitate. She agreed to come. Vanessa and Maya were ready long before Rachel arrived. Whatever they planned to do next, it wouldn't be a conversation. And from this point forward, what should have been a messy breakup between adults would turn into a violent crime that would shake the quiet town of Brookhaven to its core. Rachel Monroe's life had never been without challenges, but she had learned early on how to survive by building routines. She was born and raised in Salem, Oregon, in a working-class family where paychecks were stretched thin and everyone learned to pull their own weight. Her father drove long-haul trucks, sometimes gone for weeks at a time, and her mother worked part-time at a dry cleaner. Rachel, the oldest of 3 siblings, became the dependable one, the kind of person who made sure the younger ones got their homework done and dinner was on the table before her mom came home from a late shift. That sense of responsibility followed her into adulthood. By her late 20s, she had already lived through a failed engagement, a brief move out of state, and the birth of her son, Caleb. When she met Ethan Blake, he was a steady, if somewhat reserved, presence. He worked as a maintenance technician for a property management company, fixing electrical problems and keeping boilers running in old apartment complexes. Ethan was practical, quiet, and unromantic in a way Rachel found grounding after years of chaos. They settled in Brookhaven not because it was glamorous but because it was safe. 2 bedrooms, a modest rent, a small community where everyone waved to each other, it was enough. For years, Rachel's focus was on Caleb's schooling, on keeping the bills paid, on making sure Ethan had dinner when he came home from late calls. But safety has a way of dulling edges, and by 2023 the relationship between Rachel and Ethan had grown stale. They weren't fighting, not exactly, but there were fewer conversations, fewer shared laughs. Sometimes the silence between them felt heavier than any argument could have. That was the backdrop when Carlos Vega entered her life. Carlos had his own complicated story. He grew up in Albuquerque, New Mexico, the middle child in a sprawling extended family. His father had been in and out of the picture, and his mother worked double shifts at a hospital cafeteria. Carlos learned to be self-reliant early. He could cook for himself by age 10, could talk his way into and out of trouble by 12. He moved to Oregon in his mid-20s chasing a job and a fresh start. In Brookhaven, Carlos met Vanessa Ruiz, a woman with a sharp wit and an even sharper temper. They fell into a fast-paced relationship that led to kids before either of them had figured out how to make things work long-term. People who knew them said it was always a push-pull dynamic, passionate but also volatile. Arguments could start over nothing and end with days of frosty silence. Still, they shared a townhouse, 2 young children, and a life that, from the outside, looked functional enough. Vanessa had taken time off from work to stay home with the kids, and Carlos worked nights at the Brookhaven Home Supply, stocking shelves and unloading shipments. It was on those night shifts that Rachel and Carlos began talking. At first, it was surface level, the weather, schedules, shared complaints about supply shortages. Then the conversations drifted to their kids, to frustrations about feeling taken for granted at home, to moments of honesty about dreams that had quietly been shelved in favor of responsibilities. For Rachel, Carlos's attention was a reminder that she was still seen. For Carlos, Rachel was a listener in a world where most conversations with Vanessa had turned into fights. By late summer, their connection had crossed into dangerous territory. They exchanged phone numbers, then messages. Inside jokes became flirtations. Flirtations became invitations. And before long, they weren't just talking in the break room. While all of this was unfolding, Maya Vega, Carlos's 17-year-old sister, was living under the same roof as him and Vanessa. Maya had always looked up to Vanessa, maybe because Vanessa treated her less like a kid and more like an ally. The two would spend afternoons together while Carlos slept after night shifts, running errands, binging shows, talking about everything from makeup to relationships. So when Carlos, during a family wedding trip in Arizona, let slip to Maya that he was unhappy with Vanessa and seeing someone else. Maya didn't hesitate to take that information straight to her sister-in-law. Vanessa's reaction was swift, but it wasn't loud. Not yet. She tucked it away, let it stew. But her behavior shifted. She started asking more questions about Carlos's schedule. She paid closer attention to when he left for work, when he came home, and who was around him. And then came that day in early September when she caught sight of him walking alongside Rachel. They weren't holding hands. They weren't touching. But Vanessa saw something in their body language, a familiarity and ease, that told her this wasn't just a casual workplace friendship. She didn't confront them on the spot. Instead, she turned and walked away, letting the anger settle into something colder, more deliberate. Ethan, for his part, had no idea any of this was happening. He suspected Rachel had been more distracted lately, but he chalked it up to the demands of her night shift. He never thought to check her phone. He never imagined that the woman he came home to every evening was spending her afternoons with someone else. That's how the stage was set. A worn-out relationship between Rachel and Ethan, a strained and explosive dynamic between Carlos and Vanessa, and a teenage girl caught in the middle, loyal to the wrong person at the wrong time. By September 10th, all the pieces were in place for something irreversible. Carlos finished his night shift and came home just after sunrise, too tired to notice Vanessa watching him from across the living room. He dropped his keys on the counter, kicked off his work boots, and collapsed on the couch. Within minutes, he was asleep. Vanessa waited, listening to the rhythm of his breathing. Then she picked up his phone. The messages between him and Rachel were a mix of sweet and damning, heart emojis, pet names, plans to meet. Each one seemed to twist the knife deeper. But instead of waking Carlos up for a confrontation, she began typing. In Carlos's voice, she told Rachel that he'd been kicked out, that he had nowhere else to go, that he needed to see her. She gave a meeting spot close enough to the townhouse that Rachel wouldn't suspect anything was off. Rachel, reading the message in the middle of her morning routine, didn't hesitate. She replied that she'd be there soon. Vanessa put the phone down, her face unreadable. Maya, sitting at the kitchen counter, asked if she was ready. Vanessa nodded. Neither of them said it out loud, but they both knew, whatever was about to happen, there would be no going back. Rachel Monroe woke up that Sunday morning expecting nothing out of the ordinary. It was the kind of September morning in Brookhaven where the air was just starting to carry the sharpness of fall, and the sunlight came through her kitchen window in long golden bars. She'd gotten up early, made coffee, and was halfway through folding a load of laundry when her phone buzzed. The name on the screen made her smile, Carlos. But the words made her frown. I got kicked out. Don't know where else to go. Can we meet? There was no good morning or small talk. Just those blunt sentences. She read them twice, her mind racing. Carlos had told her plenty about his rocky relationship with Vanessa, about the fights that could go from zero to screaming in minutes. Still, the idea of him being thrown out with nowhere to go felt different, more urgent. She set the laundry down, heart picking up. Rachel typed back quickly. Where are you? The reply came almost instantly. Near my place. Can you meet me by the end of Brookside Lane? Brookside Lane was just a short walk from the townhouse Carlos shared with Vanessa. It was close enough that Rachel figured they could talk without prying eyes. She didn't think twice about it. What Rachel didn't know, what she couldn't have known, was that the words she'd just read weren't from Carlos at all. Inside the Vega townhouse, Carlos was still asleep on the couch, breathing evenly, oblivious to the plan unfolding. The phone Rachel was texting from was in the hands of Vanessa Ruiz, who was standing in the kitchen with Maya at her side. The two had been up for hours, going over what they would do, how they would confront her, what they would say. Vanessa had told Maya she just wanted to set the record straight, to let Rachel know exactly what kind of man she was involved with. But her tone, her clenched jaw, and the way her voice sharpened around the word homewrecker suggested something far more volatile. In Rachel's apartment across town, she pulled on a light jacket and grabbed her keys. Ethan was still in bed. He'd worked late on a repair job the night before, and she didn't bother waking him. She told herself there was no need. This would be quick. She'd meet Carlos, hear him out, maybe help him figure out where he could stay until he patched things up or moved out for good. By the time Rachel stepped outside, the morning sun was high enough to warm the sidewalks. Her sneakers made soft sounds on the quiet street as she walked, phone in hand, scanning for a reply that never came. She didn't notice the stillness in the neighborhood, how not a single person was out walking a dog or watering a lawn. At the far end of Brookside Lane, tucked near a bend where the road narrowed, Vanessa and Maya were waiting. They'd chosen the spot carefully. It was far enough from the main road that no one passing by would have a clear view, but close enough to their townhouse that they could get back quickly. Maya leaned against the street sign, her phone in her pocket, watching down the street. Vanessa stood a few feet away, hands in the pockets of her leather jacket, pacing slowly, eyes fixed on the corner where Rachel would appear. Neither of them spoke. From a distance, Rachel spotted them. Her pace slowed, a flicker of confusion crossing her face. This wasn't Carlos. These were two people she knew only in passing. Vanessa from the few times she'd picked Carlos up from work, and Maya from the 1 or 2 shifts she'd seen her visit. Rachel hesitated, pulling her jacket tighter around her. She glanced down at her phone again, double-checking the messages, then back up at Vanessa. The other woman's expression was unreadable from this far away. Rachel's first thought was that Carlos must be inside the townhouse and had sent Vanessa to meet her instead. Maybe he didn't want to be seen standing outside with her. Maybe this was a misunderstanding. She told herself that even as unease curled in her stomach. As she got closer, Vanessa took a step forward. "Guess who you've really been texting?" she called out, her voice carrying across the quiet street. Rachel froze. She opened her mouth, but before she could speak, Vanessa closed the distance between them. The leather of her jacket creaked as she moved, her shoulders set, every line of her body broadcasting one thing: confrontation. Rachel instinctively took a step back. "Where's Carlos?" she asked, her voice steady but low. Vanessa's smile was thin. "Don't worry about him. We're going to have our own little chat." Maya was watching intently now, her weight shifting forward, like she was ready to step in if called. Rachel's mind was still trying to piece together what was happening. She'd left home thinking she was meeting someone in need, and now she was facing two people who clearly didn't see her as anything close to a friend. She looked past Vanessa toward the townhouse, half expecting Carlos to appear, to wave and defuse whatever this was. But the doorway stayed empty, and the street behind her felt suddenly too far to retreat without turning her back. Vanessa's voice dropped lower. "You thought you could sneak around? Thought I wouldn't find out?" Rachel shook her head, her words coming quicker now. "It's not what you think." But Vanessa's eyes hardened. "Oh, it's exactly what I think." The space between them seemed to shrink without either of them moving. Rachel's pulse picked up. She glanced toward Maya, hoping for some hint of reason, but the teenager's gaze was just as cold. This was the moment the trap closed. Rachel didn't realize it yet, but there would be no conversation, no clearing the air, no quick goodbye to walk away from. This was the first beat in a chain of events that would spiral into something far beyond what any of them, even Vanessa, had planned. And in the quiet of that suburban lane, with sunlight dappling through the maples, no one was around to see it coming. The space between Rachel Monroe and Vanessa Ruiz seemed to stretch and shrink all at once. 10 feet of cracked asphalt, a patch of sunlight breaking through the maple leaves overhead, and two women locked into a silent standoff. Rachel hadn't expected a welcome, but she hadn't imagined this. The way Vanessa's gaze cut into her, the way Maya stood just off to the side like an accomplice already read into the plan. Rachel slowed her pace, her sneakers making faint scuffs against the pavement. Her eyes darted to the townhouse in the distance, searching for any sign of Carlos. Nothing. The curtains were still, the front door closed. She felt the air shift as Vanessa stepped forward, closing the distance inch by inch. "You came," Vanessa said, her tone flat but loaded. Rachel kept her voice even. "I got his message. He said he needed." Vanessa cut her off with a short laugh, one that didn't reach her eyes. "His message. Right." She tapped her jacket pocket with 2 fingers. "You really think Carlos would send for you like that?" Rachel's brow knit. "What is this?" "This," Vanessa said, taking another step, "is me letting you know that whatever you thought you had going on with my fiancé is over. Right here. Right now." Maya shifted her weight, the edge of her sneaker grinding against the curb. She hadn't said a word yet, but her presence pressed in like a shadow. Rachel glanced at her, hoping for a less hostile face, but Maya's expression was unreadable, the faint curve of her lips suggesting she was more entertained than concerned. Rachel drew in a slow breath. "I'm not here to cause trouble." "Trouble's already here," Vanessa said sharply. "You brought it when you decided to creep into someone else's life, into someone else's home." The words hit harder than Rachel wanted to admit. She could have argued. She could have explained that nothing about her connection with Carlos had been about Vanessa, that she hadn't set out to hurt anyone. But she knew it would sound hollow, worse like an excuse. So she tried another angle. "Carlos and I work together. We talk. That's all." Vanessa's eyes narrowed. You don't get messages like the ones I've read from someone you just talk to at work. Rachel's throat tightened. She didn't know what to say to that without giving more away than she should. Ethan had no idea about Carlos, and the last thing she wanted was to fuel a rumor that would blow up both of their lives. Vanessa seemed to take her silence as confirmation. She took one last step, now standing so close Rachel could see the faint smudge of eyeliner under her lower lash line. I've been watching, she said. I saw you two at the cafe last week. You think I don't notice when my man walks different after a shift? When he smells like someone else's perfume? Rachel swallowed hard, a flush creeping into her cheeks. Vanessa, I don't know what you think you're proving here, but I'm not. You're not what? That kind of woman? Vanessa's voice rose, sharp as glass. You don't get to play innocent now. The street was quiet except for the two of them, the tension so thick it felt like it might snap at any second. Rachel's pulse pounded in her ears. She shifted her weight back, testing the space behind her, but Vanessa mirrored the movement, keeping her boxed in. From the corner of her eye, Rachel caught movement, Maya adjusting her stance, slipping her phone from her back pocket. She wasn't texting. She was recording. Rachel's stomach sank. Whatever was happening here, Maya wanted a record of it. Whether to show Carlos, to post online, or to use later, Rachel didn't know. But the idea of this moment being replayed, twisted, and shared made her chest tighten. I'm leaving, Rachel said finally, her voice low. Vanessa tilted her head, the corners of her mouth tightening. No. You're going to hear me out first. Rachel glanced again toward the townhouse, hoping Carlos would appear and end this. Still nothing. Vanessa's next words landed like a gavel. You should have stayed in your lane. There was a weight behind the statement, a promise of consequences. Rachel realized that whatever she thought this meeting was going to be, a quick talk, a clearing of the air, had dissolved the moment she turned onto Brookside Lane. Maya spoke for the first time, her tone casual, almost mocking. You don't look so tough up close. Rachel's eyes flicked to her, a sharp retort on her tongue, but she bit it back. Feeding Maya's provocation wouldn't help. She took another step backward, her hands raised slightly, palms out. I don't want any part of this. Vanessa stepped forward again, closing the gap. Too late. The light shifted as a cloud passed overhead, dimming the warmth of the street. It was a small change, but it seemed to pull the air tighter around them. Rachel could feel her heartbeat in her fingertips. Her mind was already reaching for escape routes. The quickest way back to her apartment, the possibility of ducking between houses, the slim chance someone might be home and watching from a window. But every scenario ended the same way, with her turning her back, leaving herself exposed. She stayed where she was, feet planted, watching Vanessa's face for any sign of what would come next. And though she didn't know it, the next few minutes would strip away any chance of walking away from Brookside Lane unscathed. For a moment, the world seemed to hold its breath. No cars passed, no voices carried from the houses that lined Brookside Lane. Even the faint rustle of leaves in the early autumn breeze felt muted, as if the neighborhood itself knew something was about to snap. Rachel Monroe stood with her weight on the balls of her feet, the muscles in her legs taut, her hands raised just enough to say I don't want trouble without looking like she was surrendering. Across from her, Vanessa Ruiz was close enough that Rachel could see the small freckle near the corner of her right eye. Close enough that she could smell a faint trace of perfume mixed with leather and morning air. You think you get to walk away now? Vanessa asked, her tone calm in a way that was more dangerous than yelling. You think this ends because you say so? Rachel tried to steady her breathing. I came here to meet Carlos. If he's not here, then I'm leaving. Vanessa tilted her head, studying her as though the statement were a weak bluff. You're not leaving until I'm done. From behind, Maya Vega shifted her stance, the faint sound of her sneaker on pavement pulling Rachel's eyes for a split second. Maya had the phone up now, angled just right to keep both women in frame. Her lips curled faintly like she was enjoying the show. Rachel's gaze snapped back to Vanessa. She knew she was in trouble. She'd been in tense situations before, arguments at work, near confrontations in crowded parking lots. But this felt different. There was no one else around, no safety net, no easy exit. I don't want this to turn into something worse, Rachel said, her voice low but firm. Vanessa stepped forward, closing the space between them until there were only inches left. Oh, it already is. Rachel instinctively took a step back, but her heel caught on a small rise in the pavement. She steadied herself, but the brief stumble drew a glint of satisfaction to Vanessa's eyes. You've been walking around thinking you could take something that's mine, Vanessa continued, her voice sharper now. Smiling at me in the store parking lot like we were friends. all while sneaking around behind my back. Rachel's jaw tightened. She wanted to say that she'd never pretended to be Vanessa's friend, that whatever had happened between her and Carlos wasn't about taking anything. But the truth was, explaining wouldn't matter here. This wasn't about facts anymore. This was about emotions that had been brewing for weeks, maybe months, and were now boiling over. Maya's voice cut in light and mocking. Go ahead, tell her you didn't mean it. See how that works out. Rachel ignored her, focusing on Vanessa. Carlos made his own choices. If you're angry, take it up with him. For the first time, Vanessa's expression shifted, her brows knitting together. Oh, don't worry, she said. I will. Then her eyes hardened again. But first, we're going to deal with you. Rachel took another step back. Her mind was a blur of options, none of them good. If she turned to leave, Vanessa could grab her. If she tried to run, Maya was in a position to cut her off. The lane behind her stretched long and empty, it would take too long to get to the corner. Vanessa's voice dropped to a near whisper. You made me feel like a fool. And I don't let anyone do that. The quiet between them shattered when Vanessa moved. It wasn't sudden enough to be a complete surprise. Rachel had seen the shift in her shoulders, the tension coiling in her posture, but it was still fast enough to close the distance in a heartbeat. Vanessa's hands shot up, not to shove but to grab Rachel's jacket collar. The grip was tight, her knuckles white. Rachel reacted on instinct, bringing her hands up to push back, but the uneven ground beneath her made it hard to plant her feet. Maya stepped closer, circling to the side, the phone still held steady. Keep going, she urged. Rachel's voice came out strained. Let go of me. Vanessa didn't. Instead, she leaned in close, her face inches from Rachel's. You're going to remember this morning for the rest of your life. Rachel tried to twist free, her breath quickening. The collar bit into the back of her neck as Vanessa's grip tightened. The sound of fabric stretching, the faint scent of leather from Vanessa's jacket, the flash of Maya's phone catching the sunlight, all of it etched itself into Rachel's senses. Stop, Rachel said again, louder now, but her voice cracked at the end. Vanessa's reply was cold. You don't get to tell me when to stop. Somewhere far off, a car engine started, but it might as well have been a mile away. No one was coming. Rachel knew, with a sudden clarity that made her stomach lurch, that she wasn't going to be able to talk her way out of this. Words had lost their power here. And whatever was about to happen, she had only seconds to decide how to respond. Her mind raced, shove her back, pull free and run, call out for help. But hesitation cost time she didn't have. Vanessa's hands shifted, one still gripping her collar, the other pushing against her shoulder. The force made Rachel's balance wobble again, and she had to catch herself to avoid stumbling outright. You think I'm scared of you? Rachel shot back, more to buy time than out of confidence. Vanessa smirked, a flash of teeth. You should be. And in that charged instant, with sunlight flickering through the trees, with Maya's phone capturing every movement, the confrontation tipped from tense to inevitable. The turning point had come and there was no way back. The moment Vanessa's fingers curled tighter into Rachel's jacket, time seemed to slow, but only for Rachel. To her, every detail sharpened. The faint crease in Vanessa's brow, the rhythm of her own heartbeat, the glint of sunlight off Maya's phone screen. She wanted to pull free, to turn away, but her body felt locked in place, trapped in the gravity of someone else's rage. Vanessa didn't shout. She didn't need to. Her voice was low, almost steady, but it carried an edge that cut deeper than volume ever could. This isn't going away. You're not walking back to your little apartment like nothing happened. Rachel's breath hitched. What do you want from me? I want you to understand exactly who you've been messing with, Vanessa said, her eyes never leaving Rachel's. It could have ended there, a warning, a release, two women walking away in opposite directions. But whatever restraint had been holding Vanessa back began to fray. She gave Rachel a small shove, not enough to knock her down, but enough to send her a step backward. Rachel steadied herself, her instinct screaming at her to turn and run, but her pride forced her to stay rooted. You think this makes you right? She said, her voice shaking despite her effort to sound firm. Vanessa's smirk was quick, humorless. I'm not here to be right. I'm here to be done. Before Rachel could parse what that meant, Vanessa released her grip and stepped back, gesturing toward Maya. You got that? Every second, Maya replied, tilting the phone slightly. The tension in the air didn't dissipate, it shifted. Vanessa had what she came for, a confrontation caught on camera. But Rachel couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over, not by a long shot. She could see it in Vanessa's eyes, in the way her jaw still clenched, in the restless shifting of her weight. Rachel finally turned to go, forcing herself not to look back. She walked briskly toward the corner, the sound of her own footsteps impossibly loud in the quiet. When she reached the intersection and dared a glance over her shoulder, Vanessa and Maya were still there, watching until she disappeared from view. Rachel made it home without incident, but she felt every muscle in her body buzzing with adrenaline. Ethan was sitting at the small kitchen table, flipping through a utility bill. He looked up, frowning immediately. "Where have you been?" "Just out," Rachel said, hanging her jacket on the back of a chair. Ethan's eyes narrowed. "Out where?" "Nowhere important," she replied, her tone flat. She knew she should tell him something, maybe even the truth, but the words wouldn't form. She poured herself a glass of water and took it to the balcony, hoping the cool air would settle her nerves. It didn't. Within an hour, the ache in her chest had deepened. A tightness she'd ignored at first began to spread, making it harder to breathe. She blamed stress, maybe a panic attack. But when the pain sharpened, she realized something was wrong. "Ethan," she called, her voice tight. "I think I need to go to the hospital." By the time they reached Brookhaven General, Rachel's breathing was shallow, her face pale. The ER staff moved quickly, oxygen, vitals, questions. The tests came back with grim news. Multiple rib fractures, internal bleeding, liver trauma. "Has she been in some kind of accident?" one nurse asked Ethan quietly. "She said nothing happened," Ethan replied, shaking his head. She just came home like this." Rachel didn't correct him. She didn't tell them about Brookside Lane or Vanessa's grip or the shove. She didn't want to see the fallout that truth would bring. While Rachel was being treated, across town, Vanessa and Maya returned to the townhouse. Carlos was still asleep on the couch, unaware of the morning's events. When he stirred, Vanessa was waiting. "You should probably know," she said without preamble. "I saw your little girlfriend today." Carlos sat up slowly, rubbing his eyes. "What are you talking about?" "Rachel. I invited her over. Had a conversation." Carlos froze, the fog of sleep evaporating. "You what?" "She knows it's over," Vanessa said, her voice casual, almost smug. Carlos didn't reply. He stood, grabbed his jacket, and headed for the door. "Where are you going?" Vanessa called after him. "To make sure she's okay," he shot back. By the time Carlos reached the hospital, it was too late. The staff had moved Rachel to the trauma unit, but her condition was deteriorating fast. Internal bleeding was more severe than they'd anticipated, and her organs were shutting down. Carlos caught only a brief glimpse of her through the glass, pale, eyes closed, machines beeping steadily, before a nurse blocked his way. "She's critical," the nurse said firmly. "You'll have to wait." Hours later, Rachel was gone. The call to police came from the hospital, flagged as a suspicious injury leading to death. Detective Mark Hensley and his partner, Officer Dana Cho, were first on scene at the Monroe apartment. Ethan met them at the door, bewildered and grief-stricken. "We need to ask you some questions," Hensley began gently. "Do you know how she sustained her injuries?" Ethan shook his head. "She wouldn't tell me." The detective's next stop was the Vega townhouse. Vanessa answered the door, calm, almost bored. "We're here about Rachel Monroe," Hensley said. "What about her?" "She passed away earlier today," Hensley replied. "We understand you saw her this morning." Vanessa didn't flinch. "She came to my street. Started mouthing off. Things got heated. But I didn't do anything she didn't deserve." Hensley raised an eyebrow. "Would you be willing to come down to the station and give a statement?" "Sure," Vanessa said. Maya was called in separately. Unlike Vanessa, she fidgeted in her seat, glancing at the camera in the corner of the interrogation room. When asked about the encounter, she smirked. "We talked. I filmed it. That's all." But when pressed, her details didn't line up perfectly with Vanessa's. The detectives noted every inconsistency. Then came the footage, Maya's own recording retrieved from her phone with a warrant. It showed more than either woman had admitted. The grip on Rachel's collar. The shove. The tone in Vanessa's voice that went beyond mere words. By the end of the week, both Vanessa Ruiz and Maya Vega were arrested on charges of manslaughter and assault. If you ask people in Brookhaven now, many will tell you the tragedy was avoidable. That it should have ended with an argument, not an arrest. That a shove shouldn't turn into a funeral. But emotions don't follow logic, and anger rarely stops where you think it will. For Ethan, the loss was compounded by the realization that there were parts of Rachel's life he'd never known. For Carlos, it was a mess of guilt and denial, knowing his choices had set the pieces in place, even if he hadn't given the final push. And for Vanessa and Maya, the investigation had turned the camera back on them, capturing every choice, every second, that had led from suspicion to confrontation to death. Brookside Lane has been quiet since that morning. But for those who know what happened, the stillness isn't peace. It's the echo of a story that ended in silence because no one knew when to walk away. The courtroom in downtown Brookhaven wasn't large, but on the first day of trial, it felt full to bursting. Rows of wooden benches held a mix of reporters, curious locals, and family members, each one carrying their own version of the truth about what had happened on Brookside Lane. On one side sat Ethan Blake, his hands folded tightly in his lap, eyes fixed on the polished wood of the defense table rather than the women seated behind it. On the other sat Carlos Vega, jaw tight, gaze occasionally flicking toward the gallery door as if half expecting Rachel Monroe to walk through it. She never would. The prosecution laid their case out methodically. They didn't need to embellish. The video Maya had taken spoke volumes. Played on a large screen for the jury, it captured every detail. The way Vanessa's hand gripped Rachel's jacket, the shove that sent her back a step, the look in her eyes that was more than just anger. "Ladies and gentlemen," the prosecutor said, pausing to let the image linger, "this was not a conversation. This was an act of intimidation and physical aggression that caused injuries Rachel Monroe would not survive." The defense countered by framing the incident as a confrontation that had gotten momentarily physical, arguing that Rachel's injuries must have been the result of something else. A fall, an accident afterward, maybe even a pre-existing condition. But the medical examiner's testimony was clear. The pattern of trauma matched the encounter, and the timing aligned with her rapid decline. Witnesses spoke of Vanessa's temper, of the way she could hold on to resentment like it was fuel. Others spoke of Maya's loyalty to her sister-in-law, how she often mirrored Vanessa's moods. Ethan took the stand briefly. His voice was steady, but his words carried weight. Rachel wasn't perfect, he admitted, but she didn't deserve to die for her mistakes. Carlos's testimony was more complicated. He acknowledged his relationship with Rachel, admitted it had been romantic, but tried to keep his answers clipped when asked about Vanessa's behavior that morning. The prosecutor pressed him. "Did you know Vanessa planned to meet Rachel?" "No," Carlos said. "Did you give her your phone?" "No. I was asleep." "And when you woke up?" Carlos hesitated, then, "She told me she'd talked to Rachel. She didn't say how." It was enough. After days of testimony, the jury deliberated for less than 6 hours. The verdict: guilty of manslaughter and assault for both Vanessa Ruiz and Maya Vega. When the judge read the sentence, 20 years each in state prison, Vanessa's face was unreadable. Maya, on the other hand, blinked rapidly, the smirk that had carried her through much of the proceedings finally gone. Outside the courthouse, the autumn wind carried the smell of rain. Ethan left without speaking to reporters, his focus solely on the small hand of his son, Caleb, gripping his own. Carlos stayed behind longer, standing on the courthouse steps as people filed past. No one approached him, though a few gave sideways glances. He looked like a man taking inventory of his choices, of every moment that had led to this point. In the months that followed, Brookhaven returned to its usual rhythm, but for those touched by what happened, normal had shifted permanently. Ethan adjusted to life as a single parent, leaning on family to fill the gaps. Caleb, too young to fully grasp the permanence of loss, asked about his mother less frequently as time went on, though Ethan knew the absence would catch up with him in different ways over the years. Carlos moved out of the townhouse, the rooms echoing in his absence. Neighbors noticed he kept his head down now, avoiding small talk. There were rumors he'd left the home supply job, though no one could confirm it. Vanessa and Maya began serving their sentences at different facilities. Letters from the community went mostly unanswered. Whatever justifications they had told themselves in the days after the confrontation had little weight in a place where time was measured in years and freedom was something you could only see through chain link and razor wire. For the detectives who had worked the case, the lesson was one they'd seen before but never got easier to swallow. How quickly ordinary lives can collapse when pride and anger are given free rein. Detective Mark Hensley said it plainly in a rare interview months later. "We see people talk themselves into thinking they're justified, that what they're about to do is just a warning, just a way to set the record straight. But emotions escalate. One shove turns into something you can't take back. And by then, it's not about who was right or wrong in the relationship. It's about the fact that someone's dead." Rachel Monroe's name still comes up quietly in Brookhaven, at the cafe where she once sat with Carlos, in the aisles of the store where she worked nights, in the whispers of neighbors who remember the sirens that morning. But more than her death, some remember her laugh, the way she'd help strangers reach something from a high shelf, the way she made time for people even when she didn't have much to spare. The lesson her story leaves behind isn't complicated, but it's one many ignore until it's too late. There is always another way to walk away. The moments we choose to stay, to push, to corner, to escalate, can carve a path that changes every life in the room and not for the better. Brookside Lane is quiet again now. The leaves have fallen, the asphalt patched, the curb where Rachel once stood facing Vanessa indistinguishable from any other. But for those who know the story, it's not just another corner in a small Oregon town. It's a reminder of what can happen when a single morning becomes the point of no return.